Hello and welcome to the next episode of The Front Row from AVS Forum, brought to you by Anthem Electronics. I'm your host, Ryan Charpentier. Today we're going to be joined by Janina from Christie Digital Systems to talk about everything DLP. But before we jump into that, a quick word from our sponsor.
Anthem isn't just about power, it's about precision. From clean amplification to intelligent room calibration, every element is engineered to deliver pure articulate sound. Unlock the performance your system was made for. Anthem. Elevate, refine, enhance.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Ryan, joined as always by Eric, the editor-in-chief of AVS Forum. And in this go-round, joined by Janina, a field engineer from Christie Digital Systems, to talk about everything DLP. How are you guys doing? Eric, we'll start with you. Everything going well?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm excited for this one. This was going to be a good episode.
I am too. You know, everybody talks about DLP and don't really know how the insides of it work or why it's beneficial or really why it came about. So I'm excited to talk to Janina about all of this. So Janina, welcome. How are you doing? Hopefully the weather where you are in your part of the world is a little bit better than where we are currently situated.
It is absolutely amazing. Central Germany has a really big onset of spring right now. It was sunshine all day today and yesterday. Very nice, comfortable temperatures. So yes, our weather is great.
That's nice. Right now where I'm at, and you can't talk, Eric, because your weather is almost always nice. It is raining and it is like 30 degrees. So not the greatest where I am. We had great weather last week and then it decided, you know what? You had great weather, and now you're going to have crap. So we're back to crap, and we may go back to nicer weather later, but it's supposed to rain all week. But anyway, enough about the weather. We're going to talk about DLP, but before we do that, Janina, I want to know, and I'm sure the audience does too, just a little bit about you, who you are, in the history, and what maybe took you to Christie, and then we'll jump into the topic at hand.
All right. Yeah, I've got quite a fun way to get to Christie and get to the position where I am right now. So I started out studying Bachelor of Engineering for Media Technology in Germany. And during that specific course, you're supposed to have a 4-month internship at a media-related company somewhere, wherever you want. And I found to be the company Kulux, making media server software. I was absolutely, astonished. I really wanted to go do that. And I got the internship place there and I went there. And the first thing that I learned was they were recently acquired by Christie, which is like, oh, that's cool. I make great projectors. Amazing. So I had almost nothing to do with the projection side of it. I was in media server support, dealing with customers, doing trainings, doing trade shows and all of that, but, software side of it. And then COVID came and bad things happened in all of the companies. And I was basically had to make a decision. Do I want to stay with Christie and completely change my role and go into, a field where there is an open position available? Or do I want to go search for something else? And I was like, I'll stay with Christie. So I just took that role and just looked where it led me. The role was a customer service engineer. So I was responsible for fulfilling service contracts. We have a service contract with someone who booked like a service package, emergency visits, maintenance visits, regular ones, those kind of things. And I was responsible for servicing pretty much every single Dolby Cinema in Europe.
Wow.
And that is what I would do for 3 years.
So the customer service title isn't necessarily what people would normally think of, like a customer service person of just handling phone. You're actually going out and servicing these projectors, getting a really hands-on relationship with them. And you and I talked pretty extensively at ISE about your experience. And I'm shocked when you say, oh, I've only been in this role since, not even this role. The role you're in now is different than the one you started in. Since COVID, that's shocking how much experience you seem to have in that short amount of time. So I'm excited to go through this and learn a lot about what you've gotten to learn yourself and take us on this journey. I apologized to these guys earlier that I've got a bit of a cough, so I do apologize to everybody if it makes its way into this video or into this podcast. But just a heads up on that. So sorry to interject there. I just wanted to throw that out there, that I'm astonished that how much you've been able to pull in over that short amount of time. So I'll turn it back over to you.
There's actually a little bit more to that, because while COVID started, basically, I was writing my master thesis. So after the bachelor, I was thinking, yeah, that's not enough. I want to have the master as well. I need to know more. And I was looking for an interesting master thesis project together with Christie, and then they pulled something out of a drawer that I could work on, and that is now becoming VDR. So I'm very happy to have a little bit of a part in that software. But that is actually when I got into touch with the physics of projection itself, like how do lasers behave? Because this is about adjusting laser powers based on the image content. But also a little bit of how do DLPs work, because they need to play a part in that as well. So I had a bit of exposure to the mechanics behind that during that master thesis, on which I could build on then. But yeah, honestly, if you service the Rolls-Royce of projectors for 3 years, and you get into every single problem there can be with that projector, you do by nature learn very fast.
Yeah.
And it's an incredibly fascinating technology. When I got to learn about it and how it works, it still blows my mind how this works.
Well, I made the comment while we were at ISE that you have these enormous projectors, which are commercial projectors are way bigger than what people are, if you don't know, than residential units, to work with these itty bitty DMDs. And that's all it is, right? You're got this big piece of equipment effectively to service these small chips. And in the bigger commercial units, multiples of these small chips. But it's amazing that these big units are just for this. And I think you've got some that we'll see a little bit later, or as well as we can, through the camera, and maybe we can put up some images of them. But so I guess this leads us into our topic, and you start wherever you want to start, but we're going to go through how DLPs work. I have no idea really at all how they function. So I'm going to let you guide this, and we'll just go from there. So jumping right into this, everything DLP and how they function. So Janina, have at it.
Okay, so I think the first point to start is the difference between a one-chip DLP and a three-chip DLP, because that is like one huge criteria of projection. Basically, the one chip is what most people will know. If you have like a normal, a small DLP projector, it is usually a one-chip projector. That means we do not split the light up in its primary colors in red, green, and blue, and then modify the image according to that. But we have one single chip that produces the image for first red, then green, then blue. And so you've got the chip, and you have a color wheel that spins in front of the chip, and you project a red image through the red part of the wheel. You project a green image through the green part and the blue image through the blue part. And since this happens really, really fast, our eyes can't resolve that anymore into its separate colors, and that is how we perceive the colors as being at the same time. Now, the very common artifact that you can still see is either when you move your eyes very fast, or if you like wave your hand very fast in front of the image, then you can see a color separation like red, green, and blue. That is a very easy way of figuring out if you have a one-chip or a three-chip projector there. But yeah, typically the smaller projectors, just because a three-chip it takes space. I'm going to show you what a three-chip light engine looks like a bit later. It is big, even for the very small chips. So yeah, that is the one thing. And the other thing, and that is where we come into the also the higher price models, bigger size and higher price, the three chip DLPs, where we've got a prism that splits the white light coming in, may it be from a xenon bulb, from an LED light source, or from a laser, or from a phosphor light source. All of those provide you white light at first, and then it's being split into red, green, and blue. The images are being processed separately, and then you shoot everything combined out of the lens and get one whole image out of it. So that is the essential difference between one chip and three chip. The question now is then, of course, well, how exactly does that light modification, that image creation, how does that work? Because what is very easy to imagine is the principle of an LCD projector, where you have a lamp, and I have an LCD panel in front of that, and my light passes through the panel, and where I have a black pixel, the panel turns black. Where I have a white pixel, the panel turns open. If I have a gray pixel, if you know a little bit on how polarization on LCD works, it kind of gives you a half transparent pixel in that way. So light basically passes through a grid, and the grid has the light intensities that I want on the screen later. So it's fairly simple. Now, a DMD is a mirror. How is that supposed to work with a mirror? I don't have any gray on a mirror, or black or white or anything. And that is where very few people know how it works, even in the professional industry. I have heard some very interesting explanations on how these work, which all don't really, if you think about it, it doesn't really work. So I think at this point, it would be cool if we could pull up one of the graphics that I sent over, the DMD schematic that shows what that chip looks like under a microscope. Yep, that, for example. So on a DMD chip, every single pixel is a mirror. It's a tiny little mirror, and that mirror can be turned or flipped around its edge. And that is the absolutely mind-blowing part of this. The picture that you see there has been taken with a like a raster electron microscope. It's so incredibly tiny, and every single pixel, if you have a 4K image signal, then you have 4,000 of those tiny little mirrors and 2,000 of these tiny little mirrors on a chip of this size. So this is a 4K chip, and honestly, this is a big one. This is a 1.38 inch 4K chip. That's a big one. There are 4K chips that have the same amount of mirrors, but it's only half the size. So those micro-mechanical elements are just incredible. I can't comprehend how this is even possible to manufacture. But yeah, welcome to technology.
Right.
So yeah, this is incredible. And yep, on this chip, or the shiny surface, all of those, it looks like it's one surface, but it actually is not. It is tiny little mirrors. And well, now the other question is, so how do I get an image out of that? Is it like the tilt angle of that mirror, and depending on how much it's tilted in which direction, it gives me a gray value? Nope, not at all. We are using something that's called pulse width modulation. That is something that many of us may know from LED dimming. So if you have just an LED, well, a diode that gives you light, you know that LEDs typically don't like being dimmed over voltage. So if you increase or decrease the voltage, you can achieve a little bit of dimming, but the LED doesn't like that, and it breaks easily. And second, it just, at some point, it doesn't dim anymore, it just turns off, right? So dimming of LEDs over voltage is not really possible. So what LEDs do is they just flash really, really fast, because that is something that LEDs can do really well. They can turn off and on really, really fast. So if you dim an LED, you actually have a little controller that tells the LED, okay, flash now. And depending on how long your on and your off cycles are, that is how much it is dimmed. If you have it on only a tiny little bit and then nothing, and then on for a moment and then nothing and then on for a moment, that is then going to be very dark. While if it's on for a long time, then just drop it for a moment, on for a long time, drop it for a moment. That is how you have a brighter gray value. Let's put it that way. And that is exactly how the DMDs do that as well. Now, how exactly do they do that? It is mirrors, and they can just flip. And they only have two different states. They have something that's called an on state and an off state. Depending on what kind of DMD model it is, it can be around 13 degrees tilt angle, so 13 degrees that way or that way. So that is, for example, the on state, and that is the off state. So let's say my light source is at the top. Oh, that's a very good picture there. So my light source comes from the top, for example, and I'm flipping it to the off state. Now the light is being directed into my light dump. I'll get to that in a moment. And if I flip it to my on state, the light gets reflected out of the lens. So that is the one thing. The off state goes into like a garbage container for trash light that we don't want out of the lens. That's why it's called a light dump or heat dump. And we've got the on position out of the lens. And now we do the exact same thing as we do with the LED. We flip it very fast between on and off state, and hence create light coming out of the lens, depending on how bright it's supposed to be. So if we got, for example, a 50% gray, 50% would be really equally on and off and on and off and on and off, equally long. So half of the light gets out of the lens, half of the light gets into our trash area. And that is basically how every single pixel works.
That's crazy. So when the projector's on, thousands of those are constantly moving.
Oh,
Millions.
Millions, yeah.
yes.
Millions of them. Because
millions of them are moving, yeah.
If you think about it, I mean, a 4K imager, it's 8 million pixels roughly.
That's true.
So now you've got 3 DMDs, 24 million mirrors roughly are moving to create these images that you're looking at if you have a 3-chip DLP. And then if you take this to another level where you have even more complexity, like an Eclipse where you have 6 DMDs, it gets even more. I mean, you don't necessarily think about projection as having a bunch of moving parts. But in this case, it's kind of funny to think about in DLP, there's millions of really, 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 really small moving parts that are doing operations millions of times consistently,
and that
which is shocking.
Consistently over a decade. I mean, how many projectors, let's say how many cinema projectors are out there in the world that run or display content 12, 16 hours every single day? The replacement rate of these DMDs is so tiny compared to the masses of projectors we have out there. So the quality of these devices is just phenomenal. But also the production process to achieve that quality is quite extensive. I know that TI has an enormous amount of chips that they have to throw away because they're not good enough. Well, talking about errors on those chips, I did send you 3 pictures of actual DLP chips, close-ups, that I took with a macro lens. There is one that looks like a full chip in gray, if you could pull that one up.
Definitely.
Because that one is really, really interesting. So if you zoom into that, this is a very big 2K chip. So actually, So this is a 2K chip, so 2048 by 1080. Compared to this 4K, they have almost the same size, but this one just has bigger mirrors. We need those, for example, for the really, really high power projectors, where you have a lot of energy to distribute. And the cool thing about this is I took this picture with a macro lens. If you zoom in, you can actually differentiate between all of these little pixels. So this is obviously a broken one. I think the electronics in the DMD just went garbage, so all of the mirrors now display a random noise pattern. But it's so cool that you can actually see the mirrors in that picture.
That's awesome.
It is a bit more difficult for the 4K chip because, of course, the mirrors in that one the mirrors on the 2K have 13 micrometers width, and this one has 7 point something. So yeah, about a quarter the size of the pixels of the other chip. So that is, even for a really good macro lens, is very hard to show. But there is one picture that I think that shows it really well. So it's the third picture of those macro lenses that shows like the bottom right corner of the chip.
This one right here?
Exactly, that one. And the damage that you can see in this one is really just that there are lines in the image. So you can see that some of those pixels got stuck in the on state and some in the off state. And the lines that you can see there, and also there, if you can zoom in a little bit, make it a bit bigger, you can see tiny single little dots, which are then singular mirrors on that thing. And I mean, the part that we see in the image when it's zoomed out is already fairly small. It's like maybe that corner of the chip down there. It's just, yeah, it's an amazing feeling to hold this piece of technology in your hand and you can actually see something on it. You can see how immeasurably tiny everything on it is. So the precision with which this is manufactured and with which it is operated is just, incomprehensible.
So
It
we've gone
absolutely
through and kind of learned about how light is being fired from the light source into the DMD, and then the DMD is determining, is this going towards the projector or towards the screen, or is it going into the light dump? If you had a single chip DLP, it would go, once it's fired into the mirror, it would then go through the color wheel. Is that
Yes.
correct? Yeah. And then that has to be
Exactly,
time
yes.
aligned to know what
Yeah.
That's another complexity that now I'm thinking about it, is your color wheel has to be time aligned to hit the correct color. Am I correct in saying this per mirror that's coming through it?
No, all the mirrors should switch at the same time, or
Okay.
virtually at the same time. So you always have one image displayed on the chip that goes through the lens and through your color wheel in that case. Then color wheel turns further, and you've got another image displayed that goes through the wheel. But of course, it is really difficult because imagine you have a 60 hertz video signal that you want to display, then you have to have at least 3 times that frequency displayed on the DMD because you have 3 images to display one after the other. And ideally, you want to have that, if it's possible, you want that even faster because the temporal resolution may not be high enough to get rid of those rainbow artifacts that you see when you move something or when you move your eyes too fast. That was one of the problems that we had in the beginning of the technology, that the switch between the colors was very slow. And so that artifact was very prominent. And they, of course, in the recent 10 years, they made huge developments in improving that artifact, but it still is. And with all the other artifacts, once you've seen it, you can never unsee it.
Right. So how does the color wheel actually function? Like, how is it?
Oh,
how is the light, it determining what light needs to go
It
where?
really is more like a synchronization. So if you have controller boards that control your video input, that control your color wheel, and it really is the controller board, the electronics of the projector need to make sure that the image is in sync with that color wheel.
Mm-hmm. So what is the color wheel made of? Is it very similar to like a LED LCD type technology where you're firing it? It's glass.
Yes, or well, I can only speak for the ones that I know of. Those are usually dichroic filters, so it's a coated glass.
Okay.
So you've got that is heat resistant. Also, of course, it depends on the light technology that is used and the strength of the light output. The higher your light output, the more prominent it gets to heat damage, of course. And if you take cheap materials such as plastic materials, for example, you can't really go to any high light outputs or any high lasers or any of that, because you need to have a material that is heat resistant enough. And dichroic glass has been used for ages, really. If you look at moving lights, stages, and also like better filters for any kind of stage spot, dichroic filters are very common because they are very reliable. They are extremely heat resistant, and you get a phenomenal result from them. So that has really been using it for a long time in many different areas, and it just makes sense to do it in projection as well.
So is the light engine firing like a beam per mirror, or is it lighting up the entire area at the same time when it's firing into the DMD?
It lights up the entire area. Let me actually get a light engine, show what it looks like. So just talking about 3-chip light engines, because, well, the light engine for a 1-chip really is just the chip and the color wheel, basically. You may have some optical components between that, maybe glass components, maybe a lens, maybe a mirror that is part of that assembly, but basically it is the chip, shoot your light on it, it shoots it through the color wheel out of the lens. That is your light engine.
Are you kind of, if it's lighting up the entire thing, if it's lighting up the entire DMD, and let's stay on the single chip for a moment, because I want to talk about the color wheel before we go into the 3-chip. Is it kind of akin to holding a flashlight and illuminating the entire thing, and then the mirrors are what's actually using that light engine to create light per pixel? Now, when the mirror fires something towards where you would go to the screen, in this case, the color wheel, how does the color wheel change colors for what's supposed to be on the screen? Like, how is it? You mentioned that it was a piece of glass, or some cases plastic, depending on the heat that's needed. How is that functioning with changing the color that's actually being needed to be put on the screen?
Oh, that is relatively easy. I mean, a video signal is always composed out of the red, the green, and the blue part of it. If we take a really, really close look, or take a loupe or a microscope to any kind of monitor, you can see that every single pixel is composed out of a tiny little green, a red, and a blue part of it. Camera system work the other way around, so we already record red, green, and blue. Now, that means that what the DMD gets to display is always a red, a green, and a blue entire picture. So every single frame that we see on the screen later always consists of 3 completely separate parts, right? A red, a green, and a blue image portion. And mixing these colors together then mixes the actual color that we see on the screen. So if I have, for example, well, let's say a pink circle on the screen. Pink is the color that you get when you add red and blue together when it comes to light mixing. So we have basically our red image is a a red circle on a black background. Our green image is completely black because there's no green portion in that pink circle. And the blue image then is a blue circle on a black background. And that is how the images are mixed together. And that is the exact same thing for 1-chip and for 3-chip DLPs as well. It's just that the 3-chip has all 3 images present at the same time, while the 1-chip has them one after the other. They are just so fast after the other that the mixing happens in our eyes.
The color wheel is just changing each one of those colors to red, green, or blue, and then you're mixing those. How is it timing itself with all of that? Because if you have millions of pixels, one for every mirror.
But yes, but only one image. So when it's about image creation, we don't necessarily care about the singularity of those pixels. It's all of those pixels form the image, and the entire image is being forwarded through the color wheel and through the lens onto the screen. So all of these 4,000 by 2,000 or less, all of your million pixels forming your image are being shot out of the projector at the same time and just in one image plane.
So the color wheel is how many colors can the color wheel deal with? Is it just the 3? Just the 3, I'm assuming.
Depends on the system. There are a couple of color wheels that do like additional colors for doing color enhancement. On phosphor systems, for example, the colors are processed even more differently. There are transparent sections, there are frosted sections on those. So the colors can technically be a bit different on the wheel. So if you have the wheel in your hand and you look at a light source, you would see, for example, a red, a green, and a blue segment. Depending on the technology, you could see more than those. You could see maybe a yellow segment if you want to do some color enhancement. There are some really fascinating ways out there to get a nicer, a more pleasant image out of a 1-chip projector, depending on which technology you use. So there are some enhancement processes in it, but really the super basic principle of it is you have a red, a green, and a blue section that then move while the red, the green, and the blue image is displayed. So really the DMD, it receives white light. It forms an image with the white light. So right after the DMD, you would have a grayscale image in white and in black. Passes through the color wheel, and after the color wheel, you've got that same image, but in the color of the segment.
Before we continue on, just a quick word from our sponsor, Anthem Electronics.
This episode is brought to you by the Anthem MRX 1140 8K. With the MRX series, experience the clarity of 8K video across 7 HDMI 2.1 inputs, each ready for 8K 60 and 4K 120 pass-through. More than a receiver, it's the heart of your system, designed to bring every moment to life with clarity and effortless control. Anthem. Elevate, refine, enhance.
And welcome back. Again, we're joined by Janina from Christie Digital Systems, talking about everything there is to know, or a good portion of it, about how DLPs operate and how they function. To reiterate this and make sure that everybody understands, you've got the light engine pumping out light, which for all intents and purposes, more than likely is just white light. It's hitting the DMD.
Okay, oh, wait. Okay, that is actually good that you're saying that, because I think there's a bit of a misconception as well when we're talking about light engine. What you would think of light engine, because it sounds like, ooh, engine, it generates power. But that's not actually the case. A light engine just processes already existing light. Okay. So the light source, xenon, laser, phosphor, whatever, is not the light engine. The light engine only processes the light it gets.
Okay. Cool. Appreciate the correction. So the light source sends the light into the light engine.
Yes.
Then the DMDs are either sending it to the dump or pushing it on, in this case, to a single chip or a color wheel. The color wheel is then illuminating either red, green, or blue, and then that image is getting lit up on the screen, and they're overlaying on each other in different levels in order to create the colors that we're then seeing reflected back to us in the audience. Is that correct?
Yes,
for the most part. Okay.
That sounds correct. Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that people understood the relationship between how the light source was then creating the colors through the color wheel, to make sure that people understood how all of that was taking place before we moved on to the 3-chip, because
yes,
most projectors, DLPs, I think even today, are still single chip, and they're going to use color wheels. So I think it's important for people to understand how that is actually functioning, and that in a lot of capacity or cases, you're getting just white light, and then it's the color wheel that is creating the color. Okay, so off of the color wheel, now we're into 3-chip, and I believe you mentioned there was some stuff going on with prisms and splitting light into multiple DMDs and how all of that's working. So I'll turn this back over to you, and we'll keep going.
All right. So yeah, 3-chip DLPs. That is actually my, I love optical components. They are the most amazing things that you can imagine. The first time that I held an actual light engine prism in my hand, I was like, absolutely, like a little child having, a triangular prism in the hand and discovering for the first time that it separates the light, just on a different level. I've got only the prism of a light engine right here. So this is an example of what a prism looks like. It's actually a pretty complicated thing, right? That is not necessarily easy to explain. So the one tricky thing that we have about a prism where we want to separate colors and then we want to somehow magically put them back together is, how do we do that? We have our light source coming from one direction and we want to get it out a different direction, but we only have mirrors and glass. How the hell does that work? And it's very tricky, but also very fun. So this is actually the output. So the lens would then sit in the front here, or show it from the side. The lens would sit here and the light moves that way. We have 3 segments. Okay, it's hard to see because of the handle. We've got a segment on that side. We've got one on that side. We've got one on that side as well. So there are 3 sides to that prism. I'm going to get out a little lamp in a moment to show you that it actually works. Now, where do I feed my light into that assembly? Actually, it comes from the bottom. So what we have in front here is another little prism that gives you an angle. And who is a little bit familiar with optics and with optical components and how light behaves in certain mediums will know that so let's say this is a piece of glass. I'm shooting light at it from that direction. It will pass through, right? This is how glass works. If I shoot it in from an angle, if the angle is steep enough, it's just going to be completely reflected the other way around. This is how a mirror works. Or, for example, if you look at the mirror windows that you have in police stations, for example, for the rooms where you talk to the people, it's a mirror that you can see through, and that's because of the light going in through various angles. It's also how fiber works, right? We have one very long, thin hair of glass, basically, and we are shooting light in it, and it's just being reflected inside of that tiny little fiber, and it's not going anywhere outside. It just goes through because it's all reflected inside. That's the exact same principle here. So we are shooting light in from the bottom. and there is that angular piece of glass where the light is entirely reflected and goes that direction into the big assembly. And that assembly, there's actually multiple parts of glass. They are all coated differently. That assembly splits white into red, green, and blue. And let's see if I can do this. Okay, so that could work.
Yep.
So we've got blue here.
Yep.
Okay.
We've got green here.
Yep.
And we've got red on that side. So, and this is the basics of how the prism itself works. It splits the light into red, green, and blue.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on how you build your prism and your light engine, the colors may change. It may look a bit different, but basically it splits it in red, green, and blue of some sort. And you've got your DMDs sitting on those sides, receiving each the part it's responsible for. Then the mirrors do their magic, and out of the front, you shoot the actual image. This is how the prism itself works.
So how does the light, if it's firing from the light source into the light engine from the bottom, it comes into the DMDs.
Yes.
Out the sides. How then does it go back in there and then fire out the front?
So this is a light engine with actual chips mounted to it. This is a incredibly old light engine. I think it's like 10, 15 years old. It has a SXGA plus resolution.
Oh.
So
that is
and we have the exact same thing again. We're shooting our light in at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
It is then being through that reflection, that diagonal part of the prism into our light engine, and from there it goes to the 3 chips. I think we're going to have red, green, and blue. Again, where our chips sit. And now the question is, well, where does our on and where does our off state go?
Yeah.
Right? You remember that these chips only have on and off states, right? So something that is not part of this light engine is the light dump. So the light dump or the heat sink or the heat dump, various terms for it, is usually a black piece of metal that can receive heat really well. Sometimes if you're working on a high energy projector, you need to cool it a bit. But yeah, typically it's like a matte black metal surface that just receives light and does not shoot it back into the system somewhere. In this case, this light dump would sit over here, right? So this is the area where our mirrors point when they are in the off position. And this area is where the mirrors point in their on position. So yeah, it's when I was showing it a little bit earlier using my hand. This thing is heavy. When I was using my hand to show like something like this, it's more like this.
Yep.
Right. Top and bottom.
Okay. So they're firing back into the prism assembly, and then that's moving it back towards or through the out into the lens.
Yes. Either if it's in on position, out through the lens. If it's in off position, out at the top into my black piece of metal that receives my garbage light. And yeah, if anyone's interested on what it looks like when you take off one of those chips. So this is the red chip from another light engine. It's actually, if you compare the size to the 4K chip, it's very small.
It is small.
And it gets even smaller. This is really, really old equipment. The mirrors on this thing are are really big. I think the mirrors on that chip are actually bigger than the mirrors on that 4K chip. So one single mirror is bigger than a 4K mirror. I have seen chips that are like, that would have the same or a bigger resolution that are like the size of my pinky fingernail. So tiny do they get.
That's crazy.
But yeah, so you've got the chip sitting there. Also, these boards can look very different depending on how they're manufactured. Usually Texas Instruments gives you like a recommendation on how you're supposed to make them and how all the electronic components on it are supposed to be mounted and how it's all supposed to work together. Or if you put in the research, you can make your own and just do it all by yourself. But yeah, so there is an entire board behind it that receives the red, from the red side, receives the red part of the video signal, and it then makes the mirrors move accordingly. So this board is basically what turns the video signal into mirror movements. And that just then sits on the side, right at the prism. It gets its red light from the prism, makes its image out of the light, and just shoots it back in. And really all the light steering, basically, the making it go the right way, is being done by the prism. The way these parts are assembled really guide the light along a very specific path, so they all add up nicely. But yeah, actually, I forgot about that. I do have a WXGA chip, so a 1920 by 1200 resolution. So, again, size comparison.
That's small.
And these are already big ones.
So is there any issue with the light dump and contamination? Like, does it capture all of the light or is some of it reflected back in?
That is where contrast ratios come into play. Because yes, you are right. If that light dump is not like a perfect matte black and it just sucks up all of the light that it gets, it is going to reflect, even if it's just a little portion, but it's going to reflect a little bit of the light back into the prism, and it then just gets to places, preferably out of the lens, where we don't want to have it. Yeah, getting the light dump good and absorbent, but also stable, because yeah, you absorb energy. So what does the energy do? If the material absorbs too much of it and is not stable enough, then it degrades over time and it may burn. It may change its absorption parameters. It's tricky.
It's been a really interesting topic so far, and we're going to continue on.
I do have a table about efficiencies relating to pixel sizes. Yep, exactly that one. So depending on how big the overall chip is, we have a variety of factors that come into play when it comes to the efficiency. The tilt angle. So the thing is, the further you can tilt your mirror, the better you can separate between your on and your off state, the better your contrast is going to be. Texas Instruments relatively recently brought out a high efficiency pixel, the HEP DMD. That is the one you can see around the center that has a tilt angle of 14.5 degrees instead of 12 degrees for most of the other ones. So that one has a better contrast ratio. For example, by that, it can tilt further, so you can separate between on and off better. It's not necessarily 2K and 4K, but it is which chip is built inside of those projectors.
Okay.
So again, this is a 2K chip, and this is a 4K chip. In the table that we just had, this one had a pixel size of 13 point something micrometers. So one single mirror is 13 nanometers wide. This one has 7, so this one has a smaller mirror. And if we bring up the table again, you will see that the efficiencies are quite different. So this one has a total efficiency of 70%. So 70% of the light that you shoot in comes out, while this one only has 67%. But if we had a 2K chip with a smaller pixel size, because we are having a more cost-efficient projector. The smaller the chip, the cheaper it is, the more cost-efficient you can make the entire projector. If that mirror is smaller, it is likely to possibly have a lower total efficiency. If you look at the very bottom one, that one only has an efficiency of 64%. It's not necessarily why 2K and 4K have different efficiencies. It is which chips are built into these. And I'm not entirely sure because I do not know which chips exactly are built into most of the projectors out there that are not Christie. But I can only assume that the 2K chips typically have larger pixel sizes than the 4K ones that are out there. Talking about native 2K and 4K. Other things that have an impact on contrast. Contrast is a very important thing on projection systems, of course. But there are a couple of things that are troublesome for contrast. Of course, we have loads of glass components in our projector. They are incredibly pure, but they are not perfect. So there's always a tiny little bit of stray light in there. The quality of the glass components can heavily impact contrast. If you have purer glass, more expensive glass, there's going to be less refraction. If you have cheaper glass, you're going to have a bit more of that. So that is one part of this. But when we're talking about DMDs, there is one physical phenomenon that is really problematic for us, and that's called diffraction. The German word for diffraction is actually a little bit more, helps you imagining it better, because it literally translates to bending. So, and that's an effect that happens when waves, and that can be audio, light, or waves on water, any kind of wave. If it hits an obstacle, it changes its behavior depending on what the obstacle looks like. If it's just an edge, it may just split up a little bit. So on an edge, you may see color separation between red and blue. If it is a hole or a slit, then you may see that the light afterwards, as soon as it passes through that slit, behaves a bit differently. And depending on the size of that slit or on the size of the obstacle in relationship to the wavelength, interesting effects can happen. So there is one image that I sent over that was just called diffraction.png that I think shows that effect really, really well. So what we have that is basically, and I took this image from Wikipedia. There are some really nice articles about diffraction. So the bottom one that you see is just a wide slit. So you're passing light through that opening, that rectangular opening. It just passes through and it looks like the opening. Now we are making that slit smaller and it now approaches the size of the wavelength of the light that we are putting out there. And you can see in the image on the top, you don't only have the form of that slit, of that opening, but you have patterns next to that. Mm-hmm. Repetitive patterns.
And to make sure that people understand, the image on the left is the slit. The one in the middle is what it looks like after it passes through the slit, and the one on the right is the waveform.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah. Okay.
That is correct. And this is very simple because it's only one single opening. Now, imagine you have multiple of these next to each other, or you have an entire grid. Then it starts behaving very interestingly. And the best example for that kind of a diffraction grid is a CD. If you're looking at a CD, it's microscopically small, but you have tiny lines, you have tiny holes burned into the CD that form specific patterns, very, tiny, very close to the wavelengths of visible light. And when we're looking at a CD, we see colors splitting up. We see all those rainbow forms. Another surface that shows that property is a phone display. If you hold a light source on the phone display, you are going to see that it's not being reflected like on a mirror or on a glass surface, but you see that it's like it has dot structures on it. You can do that with your phone right away. If you just look at a light source reflected from your phone, you will see that it has all kinds of rainbow colors. It has kind of very interesting patterns. Another real world example for something like that is drapes, very thinly woven transparent drapes that hang in front of your window. If there's a light outside of a car passing by, or maybe a street light, you're going to see that just separated in colors and in interesting patterns. And that is all because you have very, very tiny structures that are close to the wavelength that comes through that then behaves differently. And that is where the DMD starts getting problems, because instead of the light hitting the mirror and just being passed on, like we would imagine it, the light actually bends around the mirror and does interesting things behind the mirror as well. There are tiny little gaps between those mirrors, right? So there is an entire grid there, and there are interesting and difficult things happening. That is also why we can't make those mirrors infinitely small. That's because at some point we can't reflect the light anymore, because the light just bends around all of the mirrors. It already happens on the DMDs that we're using today, even on the big ones, the 13 millimeter micrometer mirror size. That also has diffraction, and the light loss through diffraction is quite considerable. It's we're losing maybe around 10 to 15% of the light, because not all of the light is being reflected, but it just bends in ways around. That is, of course, wavelength specific. So blue has the shorter wavelength, red has the longer wavelength. So red, longer wavelength, is closer to the mirror size, and red is usually a little less efficient if you compare red and blue. So the losses in red are a bit bigger than in blue. Not a whole lot, because of course they're doing everything they can to get a hold and to control this. But yeah, this is one reason why 8K projectors, even if there was a demand for them, a native 8K chip would have to be very big, and that would make everything else very big. You have to have a huge prism, and honestly, those glass prisms are really expensive. Mm-hmm. That is scientific grade glass that you have to buy there. So you have huge components. Everything needs to get a bit bigger, because you can't make those chips as small as you really want to.
Is it correct to say that it's also not just light loss, but also contamination from that light potentially making it onto places it's not supposed to go?
Exactly. Yes, you are absolutely right. That is a problem that every manufacturer for for projectors, but also for other applications for DLP faces, what do we do with the diffracted light? Because it's being, so yeah, I mean, some of that is of course absorbed by the black background of the chip. All of those little mirrors sit on a dark background. Of course, not all of it. Some of it is being reflected in specific patterns already out again. There are some interesting pictures in the Texas Instruments documentation as well that show a little bit of what it could look like. So if I have my my light engine and I have my lens sitting in the front of it, and this is, let's say this is the lens aperture, this is where I want my light to go out, then it's very possible, and it also happens, that you have diffraction patterns somewhere around that. If you designed your system really well, you have apertures around your lens, for example, or on your prism that catch most of that, but not all the time. Sometimes you may have off-image artifacts. So you have your image on the screen displayed, and somewhere in the corner, you see colored patterns turning up that are, for example, part of that diffraction patterns. So there is, it's already complicated enough to build a light engine like that. But then you have all those little after effects coming into play that you also have to take care of. That it's fascinating.
There's a lot of moving parts.
Yep, lots of things that you need to consider. And then, of course, if you see, I have some diffraction patterns that are coming out of my lens that are undesirable. Okay, I'll put an aperture in front of it, like a piece of metal, to block that. But then that reflects that to somewhere else. So the behavior of optical parts and of light in glass and on edges is really difficult. It's not very linear. Yep. So we already mentioned that high efficiency pixel, and one more of the reasons why it is high efficiency is because it doesn't have that little dot in the middle. So most of the other chips have a black spot in the middle, which is basically, it's the hinge on which that mirror sits, so I can tilt, right? And that is visible as a black spot. If it's a black spot, then no light is being reflected from that part, which means that we are losing light. The high efficiency pixel is not going to have that. So that's going to have a smooth surface. Basically, it's going to be one singular mirror, not losing that much. But I also, when I started looking into DLP technology, and I was always wondering, well, what is that black dot in the middle? I can see that on the screen. Why is that black dot? And then learning that it's an incredibly tiny little hinge that the mirror sits on. That is, oh my God.
So on the new high efficiency pixel, is there no hinge, or is it just really small?
No, there is a hinge, but they covered it, to my understanding.
Oh, okay.
So they found a way to not make that part visible on the actual mirror. If you could bring up that DMD microscope 2 image again, where you have the little mirrors, you can see the black dots in that image that are the hinges.
This one right here?
Yep, that exactly. So yeah, there's basically is a hole in the mirror where it sits on that pointy hinge and around which it can flap. And yes, on the HEP pixel, they found a good way to cover that hole with actual mirror.
Wow. Before we wrap this up, a quick word from our sponsor, Anthem Electronics.
Anthem delivers precision engineered sound, blending cutting-edge technology with an unwavering commitment to excellence. Experience clarity, power, and sophistication that define the pinnacle of audio performance. Visit your local Anthem dealer or learn more at anthemav.com. Anthem, elevate, refine, enhance.
So, Janina, thank you so much for taking your time and allowing our audience to go with us on this journey of learning how DLPs operate. And I think the models that you were able to showcase throughout a lot of this even if somebody did kind of understand how DLPs worked, being able to see the inner workings of what's going on is very beneficial. So thank you so much for taking the time for taking us through how DLPs are functioning. Before we wrap this up, is there anything else you want to add?
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this topic that I really love talking about, because it's the most amazing technology that I personally have ever seen. As much as AI and computer technology and all of that is amazing and fantastic, but seeing a mechanical part like this work and how all of this plays together, the precision that has to happen at every single step from manufacturing to deploying it into the projector and seeing it working on the screen is just, it's mesmerizing, and it's beautiful.
You don't think about that many moving parts when you initially think about DLP, but
no,
they're there. They're there. Well, thank you again for taking your time
Thank
to
you,
join
Janina.
us and take us through that. Everything, or most everything, about DLP. Again, this was episode 19, and we're going to wrap it up here. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, stay safe out there, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good one.